Hi, yes, good evening and welcome back to my YouTube channel. Hirsch Saha here, reporting from, of course, Auckland of New Zealand. Today is Thursday, the 14th of May, 2026, and yes, talking today, how do you solve the housing crisis in New Zealand? How do you solve it? And I can recall from my own memory, even in my lifetime, well, I'm middle aged, so you could, whether you call that short or I guess that's relatively short or whatever, I can still recall in my lifetime, my memory goes back pretty much till the very late 80s, early 90s. I guess that gives you some idea. I can still remember when there was just you know computers before the internet, of not just internet before social media, but and before we had internet on our phones. If I remember correctly, here in New Zealand, we got internet on our phones in 2010, and that was the same year we got iPads. And we had social media basically in the mid 2000s, but in the early 2000s, you had MSN Messenger before social media such as Facebook and Twitter. And of course, I remember, computers before the internet, basically back in the 90s. I remember, life before computers. This is the early 90s. I remember when only dad, if he could afford it, had a mobile phone. Again, that's the early 90s. I remember when there was only one TV in the whole house, pretty much early 90s and going back further. I remember there was only one phone in the house. Well, at least for us there was. That is also very, very early 90s and going back before that. Okay, but I remember here in New Zealand when you only had three TV channels. This is going back to the 90s. I think it was 1999 when you got Sky's satellite dish, if you could afford Sky, and 99 when we got a fourth and fifth channel, which was Channel 4 and MTV. But as usual, I'm digressing and going completely off topic again. But yes, back to the topic. Now, in New Zealand, oh, excuse me, that's my stupid phone going off. You never get a break, do you? Um, how do you solve the housing crisis in New Zealand? Now, like I was talking about in my lifetime, and say if we're going back to the 90s, it's amazing how much more affordable housing used to be here in New Zealand, even in the larger cities such as Auckland, Wellington, Christchurch. I do recall that up until about the late 90s, it was pretty affordable. You could buy not the best house, but a decent, say, three or four bedroom house with one or two bathrooms with land, not too far away from the CBD, even in a city such as Auckland, Wellington, or Christchurch, you could pick that up for below about $200,000, even below that. This was up until about the year 2000, pretty much up until about the year 2000, even 2001, even coming into 2002. That's what the story was back then. Obviously, average salary was less back then, sure, but that house price was much much less in comparison to what the same house would cost today in May 2026. And I remember I distinctly remember it was the beginning of 2002 where you had that first housing boom, beginning of 2002 to the middle of 2007, that boom, and which of course that was slowed down in late 2007 with interest rate hikes here in New Zealand, and then of course in 2008 with the global financial crisis. You had a few other housing booms after that, such as the one from what they call Chinese saturation, which is approximately 2012 to 2017, after the end of the Great Recession or the global financial crisis, which was about 2008 to 2011, 2012. You had the Chinese saturation housing boom from about 2012 to 2017. And then, of course, you had the so called COVID boom, which was basically 2020 to 2022. And that was when they dramatically decreased interest rates during the times of COVID because they thought the economy would contract so much, and it didn't. Well, so they got that wrong. And when they dramatically decreased interest rates, through the OCR, the official cash rate set by the Reserve Bank, when they did that, the housing market just shot up. It experienced literally about 10 years of growth in just 2 years. So, yes, from basically the beginning of 2002, the housing market in New Zealand has gone crazy, and a lot of people have been priced out of the market. You know what's happening now? People are saying that either you have a family or buy a house in your life, whereas it was much easier for our parents, the previous generation, Generation X, the baby boomers. It was much easier for them to do both. And not only that, in those times, only dad had to work. Mum didn't even have to work. On one, pretty normal salary, they would be able to afford a house after marriage and, of course, to have kids. Now it's like, do I buy a house or do I have a family? But the conundrum there is that you only need a house if you have a family, right? If you're a single person like me, well, maybe not for too much longer. I'm talking to someone lovely, but if you're a single person or a couple, you don't need a house. You could live in a one bedroom apartment. Even flat. or rent out a room somewhere. But of course, if you're a family, you really do need a house, or at least say a 2 to 3 bedroom apartment of your own, at least even to rent. So it's amazing how we've gone backward in that respect in terms of affordability. Today, now both people, mum and dad, or the man and the woman in a couple, both people are working, and even then they're struggling. It's hard to get into the housing market. They can sometimes have children, sure, at least thank God, but it's very unaffordable, and it's they're working, both are working full-time jobs. Sometimes both are working long hours, and it's still hard. It's still hard, and that's the way it is here in New Zealand. And with the current, if you like, global more or less recession here in 2026, with the cost of living crisis, what climate change has done to the planet, worsening international relations, that disgusting orange thing back in the Oval Office, wreaking havoc left, right, and center, not just having the Strait of Hormuz closed through his idiotic Iran war, but we really have gone backwards, and it's not good. Of course, it's not good. So many people are suffering, and of course, the people who really suffer are those at the bottom, the poor and middle class, the immigrants, and of course those of color, you know? And it's very sad. They are the ones who always suffer. If they're poor and of color and an immigrant, it's even worse for them. But okay, now that we are here, of course we can't change the past. It's a bit like climate change. You can blame your parents, you can blame their generation, you can blame all previous generations. It's a bit like that previous talk video I had. Would I blame previous generations for the way things are today? And I wouldn't, because many of them didn't know what would happen today, the way things were back then. And don't think we've also played a part. We've also had carbon emissions, but you can blame who you want. We are where we are today, and I guess the only choice we have is to move forward from today and to do the best we can today, and I guess to make the best of it. See the opportunities in this difficulty, like the typical optimist, as they say, not the pessimist who sees the difficulty in every opportunity. So, finally coming to it, how do you solve the housing crisis in New Zealand today? Okay, this is, of course, what I think. How do you do it? Now, what we need to do, especially in cities such as Auckland, Wellington, Christchurch, Hamilton, Palmerston North, Dunedin, and Invercargill, we need to make it easier for there to be development, of land, especially in a city like Auckland in particular. We need to make it easier. Oh, geez, my phone won't shut up, will it? Then we need to make it easier for there to be development of complexes, residential complexes, which are as close to the CBD or the central of that city as possible. Yes, we need to balance it so there's not over congestion. We need to make sure that the roading, the infrastructure is up to date so you don't get traffic woes, and that all even adds to climate change. I know that's much easier said than done, but this is what we need to do as a plan, or as an idea at the very least. So we need to make it easier for residential complexes to be built. I don't mean houses, standalone houses on quarter-acre sections, the Kiwi dream. I don't think that's just sustainable anymore. We really need to look at complexes. I remember living in a complex called The Grange in Albany of Auckland's North Shore, and I lived there from 2012 to 2015, and on just 4 acres of land, you had 105 units. Most of them were apartments, but you also had some townhouses. You had one bedroom apartments, and they ranged in size from those small one bedroom apartments of about 40 squares up to 3 bedroom townhouses, I think of about 150 squares, something like that. So, you had a range of units, and but within just 4 acres of land, you had 105 units altogether. You had car parks for all those units, garages, as well as plenty of visitor car parks. You had a lot of greenery and wide open space. You even had a tennis court and a swimming pool facilities. So I thought that was pretty good, being able to house 105 units in just 4 acres of land. And of course, you can be even more efficient than that if you have buildings of 10, 15, 20 stories and even reasonable sized apartments. You can be even more efficient in how you house people. But again, you have to watch out for the congestion and make sure that the local infrastructure is up to date so it can cope with morning and afternoon traffic going to and from work. But I think we need to do residential complexes, and we need to make it a bit easier for developers to be able to do that and free up land for that development. Also, if you have apartments and townhouses, that immediately makes the properties cheaper than if they are standalone houses on quarter acre sections. But I would go even further. I would go even further, and this is where some of you might get a bit uncomfortable, but hear me out. I would make those properties leasehold. Yes, I would make them leasehold. So what happens is the land is owned by someone else, or say the original developer, and what people buy are leasehold properties. I know that's not very appealing. I know that's not very, attractive. I know that's not very sexy. But you have to start somewhere. And being able to buy a leasehold apartment, even a one-bedroom leasehold apartment, that's better than nothing, right? You have to start somewhere. So I say, let's make it easier for these residential complexes of even up to 100 or more units and just a few acres of land. Let's make it easier for these complexes to be developed in the right locations, close to the CBD or the central of the main cities here in New Zealand. And let's make those properties leasehold. Let's also make it so only first home buyers can buy them. Let's also make it so only first home buyers can buy them. Investors can invest in the land and get the income from the people who own those properties, because with leasehold, what happens is that you own the building that your property consists of, but you don't own the land that the building is on. You pay a lease for that. Someone else owns the land. And what I also suggest we do here is that we give the people who own the building, the lessees of that leasehold land, we give them more certainty that the rent of that land only goes up by a certain amount or percentage every, say, 5 or 10 years, and that continues for a good 50 to 100 years. So they have the certainty over it, and it's much easier to value the land. And also, the investors who invest in that land have certainty over their returns, right? That would give those leasehold properties much more value. And that would also make it easier for people to get loans from banks to buy those leasehold properties. So if you ask me, to solve the housing crisis here in New Zealand, especially in the tier 1 and tier 2 cities, or the major larger cities, not really the small towns, that's how I would do it. Make it easier for those developments to be built, residential complexes that hold, say, at least 100 households and just a few acres of land, but while not being congested, while making sure that the local infrastructure can handle the new traffic, and you make it so that the properties are not only smaller, being apartments and townhouses, but you make it so those properties are leasehold. So it's so much more affordable to people to buy. And then you make it that only first home buyers can buy them, own occupiers, not investors who would snap them up like, hotcakes. You make it so only first home buyers can buy them, but investors can buy the land and get the return of that. And again, you make it so the lease of that land is fixed in terms of how much it increases by, or the percentage or the amount it increases by, say every 5 years or 10 years, and you make it on long-term leases such as 50 to 100 years, giving certainty to both the lessees, the owners of those properties who live in them, the first-home buyers, and the lessors, the investors who own the land it's on. That is what I would do, personally, to solve the housing crisis here in New Zealand today. On the 14th of May, 2026, that's what I would do. But hey, let me know your thoughts. Let me know in the comments below. Thank you.